Okay, so today we're talking about theories of memory, how we remember, and the contents of long-term memory. So one particular theory of how we form memories is called the three-box or the three-stage model of memory. And as you can see, the name comes from the three different stages that it is proposed that memory transfers through and ultimately ends up in long-term memory where we can store this information. So we'll go through each of these three different boxes in greater detail. So first we have our sensory register or sensory memory. This is basically the information that you take in from the environment using your five senses. So you see something, you hear something, smell something, touch something, taste something. That is a type of memory, right? Those kinds of things aid us in forming some kind of experience. And your sensory register is really exciting because it has this capacity to match up the things that you are experiencing in the environment and to compare it against patterns that you have already stored in your memory. So for example, you might come into a new classroom at the start of the semester, and that classroom might have chairs in it. And the chairs might be slightly different from any other chair that you've ever seen in your life, but the pattern, the general pattern of the chair matches the pattern that your memory has stored for what a chair should look like. So this aids us in very, very quickly and efficiently being able to kind of make sense of the environment, of the world that is around us. With your sensory register then, the information that is taken in here is held for a very, very short period of time, about half a second to 2 seconds at the most, unless we determine that this information is important enough that it needs to be passed on to short-term memory. I mean, just think about, every day you take in so much from the surrounding environment. There are so many different things that you could potentially be paying attention to. So right now you could be paying attention to the sound of my voice. Maybe there are people who are talking around you. Maybe the person next to you is writing something down. You can hear the sound of her pencil as it moves across the paper. Maybe you're paying attention to the feel of the chair that you're sitting in right now, or the way that your arms feel on the desk. There are thousands and thousands of things that you could pay attention to, and it's just not possible though to be able to pay attention to all of those. And so we need to selectively choose what we're going to pay attention to, what is the most important, and then what from those sensory experiences do we determine is important enough to pass on to the next box, short-term memory. So short-term memory then has a limited capacity. Information in short-term memory can be held there for about 30 seconds at a time. So the short-term memory then is the second box on the way to passing information to long-term memory. So information comes to short-term memory from sensory memory, but short-term memory is also used to work with information that you've retrieved from long-term memory. So information that you're using temporarily, that you're using right now, is in short-term memory so you can work with it. So for example, let's say that you are figuring out how to solve a math problem. Your long-term memory contains knowledge of the steps that you need to go through in order to solve that problem. It also contains basic arithmetic functions, your times tables, things like that. And you draw on those things from long-term memory and pull them into short-term memory because that's the information that you're using right now to be able to solve the particular problem that you're faced with. So short-term memory only holds information for about 30 seconds at a time. One way that you can enhance your short-term memory is using this memory technique that's called chunking. And with chunking, we basically take small pieces of information and we put them together to form some kind of unit. So short-term memory, we said, has limited capacity, right? You can hold the information there for about 30 seconds, and at any one given time, you can work with between 5 and 9 pieces of information in your short-term memory, okay? So it's limited in capacity as well in terms of the number of pieces of information that you can use. So if you want to be able to work with more pieces of information in your short-term memory, you can chunk that information. So let's look at this example here. In the first line, we have a list of 16 letters. So that would be 16 pieces of information, well beyond the limits of your short-term memory, right? So we've already exceeded the capacity of short-term memory. As a consequence, then, you will not be able to remember each piece of information accurately. So what can we do? We can take these 16 individual items and group them together in a way that makes sense, so that instead of I, B, M being 3 pieces of information, we can put it together into one piece of information, IBM. And suddenly we have taken 16 pieces of information and grouped them into 6 pieces of information, so that our short-term memory will be able to handle all of this information. Short-term memory also includes something called working memory. With working memory, this basically has your short-term memory and also the processes that allow you to retrieve that information from long-term memory and use that information when you are doing a given task. So as I said before, the operations that are involved in doing a math problem are one example of, using your working memory. So going back into long-term memory, getting the information from there, and then bringing it into your short-term and working memory, where you're actively manipulating and actively using that particular set of information. Long-term memory. So this is the final stage in the 3-box model, the long-term storage of information. So long-term memory, then, the information that is stored here could potentially be there forever. There's no real limit in terms of the amount of information that you can store in long-term memory, and that information will be there. It's basically how you get to that information. So how is it organized? And we'll talk about that a little bit later on when we talk about theories of forgetting, or why we can't remember information. But so then, looking at ways that information is organized in long-term memory, we can look at what are called semantic categories. And semantics basically deal with meaning. So we have here animals as a particular example of semantic categories. So if you look at this grid here, you'll see that in the center of these clusters, this conceptual grid, we have animals first as our highest up category, and then we have things about animals, right? And all of these lines that are coming off of animal, connecting it to things that you know about animals, those are all potential pathways for our brain to be able to get to that piece of information. And so sometimes when we can't remember something, or when you have that kind of tip of the tongue phenomenon, you know the answer but it's just out of your reach, oftentimes it's because one of these pathways to get to that piece of information is blocked in some way. Long-term memory, the contents of long-term memory we can divide up into several different categories. So broad categories here. First we have procedural memories. So these are memories for doing a procedure, right? For knowing how to do something. So memory for knowing how to tie your shoe, knowing how to make a birthday cake, knowing how to apply the quadratic equation. These are all procedural memories, knowing how to do something. Declarative memories, on the other hand, are memories for facts, rules, concepts, events. And we further divide declarative memories into two subcategories. The subcategories are semantic and episodic memories. Declarative memories are knowing that. So this is basically knowing information. So knowing that 2 plus 2 is 4, knowing that the earth is round, knowing that the earth is in part of the solar system. So in further dividing declarative memories, we said that there are two subcategories, semantic and episodic memories. So semantic memories then are those general knowledge facts, general knowledge information that you know. So this is like 2 plus 2 is 4. The sky is blue. That's general knowledge. Episodic memories, though, are things that you have personally experienced. So memories that you have from the episode of your life, okay? So personally experienced events. So you might have an episodic memory for your first day of college. You have an episodic memory for, let's say, your second grade teacher. Do you remember who that was? If so, then that's an episodic memory. You might have an episodic memory for what you did on your 16th birthday. These are all episodic memories, personally experienced events.